Hello everyone. This week's video is on minimum wage. And we're going to have a talk about this. I'm going to talk about the history first, and I'm going to provide facts and information. I'm not just going to go on a political rant, so to speak. My goal with all these videos is to get you to think and learn something. Maybe you'll start looking for information on your own instead of relying on the news sources because they're biased. We're going to talk, that's definitely a topic for a future video. All the web pages I bring up today will be linked in the bottom of the video so you can go to them and read them if you want to learn. Okay? Now, the first one right here is from the United States Department of Labor, and it's about the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. President Roosevelt in 1938 signed the law that brought us minimum wage. He signed it into being, okay? Now, let's talk about why. It talks about why minimum wage law got passed. And I'm scrolling down about a quarter of the way down the page, and it says, while President Roosevelt was in Bedford, Massachusetts, campaigning for a re-election, a young girl tried to pass him an envelope, but a policeman threw her back into the crowd. Roosevelt told an aide, get the note from the girl. Her note read, I wish you could do something to help us girls. We've been working in a sewing factory, and up to a few months ago, we're getting a minimum pay of $11 a week. Today, 200 of us girls have been cut down to $4, $5, and $6 a week. A reporter questioned the president, who replied, something has to be done about the elimination of child labor, long work hours, and starvation wages. And that is President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And up at the top, it starts talking about signing the bill. And right here it says, 40 years later, a distinguished news commentator asked incredulously, my God, 25 cents an hour? Why all the fuss? President Roosevelt expressed a similar sentiment in a fireside chat the night before the signing. He warned, do not let any calamity howling executive with an income of $1,000 a day tell you that a wage of $11 a week is going to have a disastrous effect on all American industry. In light of the social legislation of 1978, Americans today may be astonished that a law with such moderate standards could have been thought so revolutionary. The important part here is that the arguments in 1938 for a minimum wage are the same arguments we have today. The reason it got passed then is the reason they're trying to increase it today. And minimum wage has been increased numerous times over the years. That can be found easy enough. Just type into Google minimum wage history and you'll find every single increase with the date. And when I did that, I came across this graph here. Now, the big question that everyone should be asking right now is, if minimum wage, raising minimum wage is such a good thing, why do we keep getting the same arguments? Why does it keep happening time and time and time again? Well, the answer to that is basic economics. And I've got a graph behind me here, and I'm going to zoom the camera in on the graph. I'm not going to go to a cut scene with a video of the graph because, well, I can do that. I do have the software for it. It's just not, it's easier this way. I'm trying to do one-take videos. Now, if you notice, the top line is wage and adjusted wages. The bottom line is the actual wages. And I want to discuss the trends in this graph. Right here we have a basic minimum wage, and it shows you the actual wages up here. The minimum wage was 30 cents. They raised it up. You'll notice people's incomes went up. And then they slowly declined until they raised it again. And then their incomes went up and they slowly declined until they raised it again. Their incomes went up, they slowly declined until they raised it again. Their incomes went up, it slowly declined until they raised it again. In other words, this trend continues all across the board. That is, every time they raise minimum wage, what happens is that you get a spike in income. In other words, right when you raise minimum wage, it helps. People get more money. And then over time, the economy adjusts and puts them right back in the same position they were in. So raising minimum wage does nothing. It just causes momentary pain or momentary joy, depending on your perspective. The perspective of the employee, the person earning minimum wage, is momentary pain. I mean joy. They love getting this minimum wage increase because all of a sudden they got more money. The flip side is the businesses people who employ them have to make readjustments. They're no longer making the money they were making. Why? The money to pay the workers has to come from somewhere. The argument quite commonly used is a CEO is making thousands of dollars a day. He doesn't need all that money. Let's cut his salary and share it with the workers. We're going to talk about CEOs in a later video and why they get paid that well. That's what was going on in 1938. It's still going on today. There's a reason for it. And it's not to take money out of your pocket. You need to let that envy go. Certain groups use that envy to drive your fears and your misunderstandings so they can control you. It's been going on for hundreds of years. Roosevelt was doing it. That's how we got the minimum wage in. Now, getting back to this, again, companies have to make adjustments because their profits go down. Some companies go out of business, people lose jobs. And that's why this thing starts declining. Companies are readjusting, prices are going up. As prices increase, that money you're making no longer goes as far, and you end up back where you were at square one, and you start screaming, I need a wage adjustment again. It's an endless cycle. Sooner or later, we just got to stop the cycle, because all it does is cause inflation, and it puts a lot of people out of work. Okay? So let's start talking about the facts behind increasing the minimum wage. There's another webpage here. This one's pretty bipartisan. In other words, he goes to great pains to explain what happens when you increase minimum wage in non-political terms. He tries to do it in economic terms. Okay? And he goes into the history of it. History of the minimum wage. It was first 25 cents an hour, and he talks about who gets paid minimum wage. And he says most minimum wage earners tend to be young and female, okay? And the group with the greatest percentage of workers paid at or below minimum wage is the leisure and hospitality. Leisure and hospitality, that's movie theaters, fast food chains, restaurants. Most minimum wage workers come from those areas. We got Walmart in there. Actually, Walmart doesn't pay minimum wage. They pay above it. Not much above it. I won't argue with that fact, but they do pay above it, okay? And then debating the merits of minimum wage. And he really tries hard here to talk about non-political terms and non-offensive terms. What will happen if we raise minimum wage? And it's kind of outlined in what I said, that people lose jobs. I run a small business. You raise minimum wage, my 3 or 4 part-time workers are going to drop to 1 or 2. Because I can't pay them as many hours as I did before. I can't have 2 on shift at once. I have to cut it to 1. Simply because that money has to come from somewhere. It comes from me, and I can't pay rent on the building that I use for my business if I pay too much in payroll. My payroll expenses are already, they're about 1/10 of my cost of operating the business. Office rent is half. So if my employee costs go up to 15 or 20%, that money's got to come from somewhere, okay? I don't make an awful lot of money. Most small business people, they do make money. They're better off than other people, or they wouldn't be doing the small business. The headaches that come with it, the hours should come with it. I wouldn't do this if there wasn't some reward. And, you raise minimum wage on me, I got to lay staff off. I have to decrease the hours I'm paying out in order to keep myself in the same place. I'm going to have to increase prices to compensate. This is what happens, okay? And he goes into all of this, the effect of minimum wage on economic growth. It slows economic growth. How much should a worker be paid? He goes into this, and he tries really hard not to talk about one aspect of it. A lot of people at minimum wage have made decisions that have left them in this position where they're living their lives on a minimum wage. They decided not to go to college. They decided to drop out of high school. They decided drugs was a good course of action. Some people just didn't get an education. They came to this country without an education. The list goes on and on and on. And this is not a debate on that aspect of minimum wage. This is a talk, not a debate on what minimum wage does, increasing minimum wage does. Okay? So I'm not going to get into how people ended up living on minimum wage. They do, and to be honest, the best way to get them off minimum wage is for them to go back to school, get an education, clean up their act, and start doing the right thing, okay? Living on minimum wage, I don't think minimum wage was ever designed for a living. It was just a minimum stopgap so people could actually exist at the very bare minimum, okay? So if you want to do better, you're going to have to get an education, get a job. I actually lived in a very poor neighborhood for 5 years of my life. And the average income in that neighborhood was quite low. It was quite common to have multiple families in each house just to exist. And one day I looked around and said, I'm not doing this anymore. And I started working on my business and I made it grow. And I got out of there. And that's what we need to do. We need to help people realize that they can do these things instead of slapping a Band-Aid on it and say, okay, here's a new minimum wage. A new minimum wage doesn't do anything. It's a Band-Aid. It helps for a little bit. But over time, you're right back where you were. You've got to change your habits to get out of poverty, to get out of living on a minimum wage. Raising minimum wage won't do it for you. It's something you have to decide to do. But he talks about all this right here, and there is a second page. I haven't looked at the second page, to be honest with you, so I don't know where we're going to get. And that's just the conclusion on the second page. Okay? Now, talking about this, he said most fast food workers. So we're going to start talking about the aspect of fast food workers. I don't know if you can see this, but this is McDonald's solution to raising the minimum wage. Self-serve kiosk. They cut out 3 or 4 of their employees by putting computer terminals in. You put your debit card in, you order it, you pay, and someone brings you your food. Instead of, 5 or 6 people working registers, they got 1. Walmart's been doing it with the self-serve checkouts too. It cuts down their employee costs. This is what's going to happen. You're going to have a lot of people losing jobs. Now, that's at the bigger restaurants like McDonald's. Again, the smaller restaurants, smaller businesses like mine, we can't do that. We have to absorb it somehow because we're competing with other people, and it gets to be messy. And Seattle's already gone to $15 an hour for minimum wage. And if you read this article, he comes out and talks about, it didn't change unemployment. Seattle's a small part of the country. Of course, it didn't change unemployment. But what is happening is small business owners are starting to lay back people. It is changing on the fringe, on the edge. Okay? And if you start reading through it, it starts talking about what happens. We are seeing changes in Seattle itself. Okay, restaurant owners' concerns how to compensate for extra funds now be required for labor. They may need to raise prices, source poorer agreements, reduce operating hours, reduce labor, and more. Okay? And the Washington Restaurant Association puts it this way. It's not a political problem, it's a math problem. And restaurants are closing at a higher than normal rate in Seattle. Okay, this is in there. You can read it. The facts can't be disputed. This is what happens. It's exactly what that earlier graph shows. Now, I'm going to include this. This is Huffington Post article on the top 10 arguments for raising the minimum wage. They're ignoring history here. Okay? They're just completely ignoring history when they go through this. Job losses from raising minimum wage are negligible. No, they're not. That's why you have to keep raising the minimum wage. I'm not just going to debate it. You can read it and you can compare it to the other articles and you can see someone's not telling the truth somewhere. If you compare it back to that graph I showed at the beginning, they aren't telling the truth. Huffington Post is not giving proper facts. Now we get to a couple of whys. Why do politicians want to raise minimum wage? Well, if you start paying attention, you will notice that the debate for raising minimum wage tends to be on the Democrat side, not the Republican side. So let's talk about it for a little bit. Sorry, I just looked, my camera battery's about to die, so I want to give it some power. Okay? And I have the power cord in hand. I'm just going to move the camera. Sorry to do this mid-video. I'm not going to stop, though. Okay? There we go. No battery dying now. It tends to be the Democrats who want to raise the minimum wage. Now, why? votes. Look, if you elect me, I'm going to raise the minimum wage. You'll be able to live better. It's a false promise. We've already shown it's a false promise. It's about votes and control. They control you through hanging little carrots in front of you. That's why the Democrats are all for raising minimum wage. It doesn't help get you out of poverty. It helps trap you in poverty. It's not going to improve your life conditions. Improving your life conditions is better schools, better education. That's not something they tell you when they want to get reelected. They're like, let's give you more money now. Let's not help you in the long term. Let's help you right now. Yeah, it's going to help you right now. But 3 years from now, you're going to be back where you were. It's not, it's a Band-Aid. It's not a fix. We need fixes. Okay? And right here, this article right here says the minimum wage debate, a $15 minimum wage. But why just for fast food workers? Why is it that we just want to raise the minimum wage for fast food workers? Where does that come from? Another political group. Okay? And we got an article about them. It's right here. It's the SEIU. Service. It's one of the unions. Okay? And let's see if I can find the name of the union. If I just type it into Google, it'll show up. I'm not prepared on this part. Sorry. SEIU. Service Employees International Union. I should have known that. They are behind the push to raise minimum wage to $15 an hour. Why? Union dues. That's why. They want union money. They are pushing to raise minimum wage to get people in their union so they can get union dues, and then they have more money and political weight to get people to do what they want. What they want is for the Democrats to protect the unions. And I'm saying Democrats here because if you look up contributions to political parties, the top 10 contributors to the Democrats tend to be unions. I'm going to look that up. I didn't think about that earlier. Top organization contributors to Democrats. I'm going to put this in a link too, and it's there. Service Employees International Union is the #1 contributor to Democrats. So it's going on the link list. Okay? #1. And if you start looking, a lot of these are unions. Okay? They give $220 million to Democrats, and they give $1 million to Republicans. Percent to Democrats, 99%. The top 10 give almost all their money to Democrats. And almost all of them are unions. Or Federation of Teachers, which is basically a union. The unions are behind the push for minimum wage because they want more people in their union. It's the only way they can grow their union. They're at a maximum right now. Some states are deunionizing, which doesn't help them. So they're trying to get more members. So they're behind the push for minimum wage so they can get more union dues. And the funny part is, they want to be exempt from the $15 an hour minimum wage that they're pushing for. You got to love this logic. Let's give everyone a minimum wage, but us, we don't want to pay it. We want McDonald's to pay it, not us. Hypocrites. Okay? And there's one last angle to talk about here. Another reason Democrats are pushing minimum wage, Obama especially. It's called Obamacare. I got an article here. It's from ABC. You know, they typically support Obama. So don't think I'm pulling this off Fox News. In fact, most of these articles don't come from Fox News. I had a comment in one video, stop watching Fox News. Well, if you look at the links, they're not Fox News. I will use Fox News for links sometimes, but not always. Getting into this, Obamacare, when it comes fully effective, and it hasn't yet, Obama's been delaying it. He wants that mess to hit the next president. He doesn't want that mess dumped on his head. Once it gets fully implemented, full-time workers are going to get a huge cut because no one wants to pay for this beast. the price increases are finally starting to hit. I'm seeing on social media that people's insurance 2 years ago was $600 a month. It's now $1,200 a month for the same family. It's crazy. You know, we're getting 30-40% increases in insurance in the next year or two. And it hasn't fully been implemented. When it's fully implemented, no one can afford insurance, but you're going to get fined for not having it. Also, they estimate people are going to lose hours at work. And you can find these debates on there. Will you lose hours for Obamacare? Yes. What this article is talking about is, let's restore hourly wage cuts by Obamacare. So, when you go from working 40 hours a week at minimum wage down to 20, what can we do about it? Well, let's double the minimum wage so you get the same number of hours, up to $15 an hour. That's where the $15 an hour figure came from. It is restoring your wages due to lost work time because of Obamacare. And it's for the minimum wage people. It's not for anyone else. That way you have the same take-home pay, even though you're losing hours at work. Article's there. I'm not making this up. This isn't some conspiracy theory. It's on ABC. I will link to it so you can check. So, conclusion, because I'm trying to keep these things under 30 minutes. I want them at 15 minutes or so. The conclusion is basically this. Raising minimum wage doesn't do anything. It's a political ploy. It's an attention grabber. They're trying to get votes. They're buying your votes. Vote for me. I'll raise minimum wage. I'm going to help you. It doesn't help you. It's a temporary help. In the long run, you're still stuck at the same economic and social level. The only way to get out of the economic social level is to improve yourself, get out, get a better job, get an education for a better job, and try. That's the only thing you can do. You don't have to be the brightest thing in the world to start your own business. I've met many small business owners who don't have college educations. They just took the risk and the challenge to get themselves somewhere in life, and they did. That was the American dream. The American dream these days is not that anymore. It's something else. We'll talk about that on another video as well. Don't know what I'm going to do next week. I'm thinking politicians or justification, one of the two. Because politicians like to justify things when there is no justification for it. So we'll talk about that next week, or politicians, or something else. I might even talk about Donald Trump, for all I know. I'm just going to wait till and see what happens next week. I'm going to put all of this in the video description so you have links to everything, so you can read up and be informed instead of just watching the news and taking their word for it, because that might be next week's video. The press is biased. The press doesn't tell you everything. If they did, you wouldn't be happy with them. They know it. So they don't tell you everything. So everyone, start thinking and start just looking at things and challenging what you're being told. And ask your politician, if minimum wage increase is such a good thing, how come it hasn't worked in the past?